The faith that silenced me, I was born inside the church. And that's not a figure of speech. Literally, my mother went into labor during a Wednesday night service. While the choir was rehearsing Amazing Grace, I was kicking, asking to come out. My father, of course, was the pastor. And not just any pastor. The pastor. The highest spiritual authority in a town where the Bible is used as currency, as sentence, as shield. For many people that would be an honor. A calling. A privilege. For me, it was a prison with stained glass windows. From a young age, I was taught there were only two ways to live. The right way, and the way that condemned your soul to hell. My father was not a man of half measures. He preached with a pointed finger, a voice that thundered through the mic, and a gaze that made every child believe God was watching everything. I grew up afraid of God, and even more afraid of myself. In our house, truth had to follow Scripture, and Scripture said men were leaders, women submissive. Love was between a man and a woman. Desire beyond that? Demonic possession, doubt, lack of faith, self-expression, pride, identity outside the norm, a capital S sin. By the age of 5, I knew how to pray in public. By 7, I was memorizing Bible verses. By 9, I was used as a sermon illustration by my father. Look at my son, obedient, God-fearing, a true soldier of Christ. And deep down, all I wanted was to cry. Because even there, on that altar, surrounded by applause, I didn't exist. I started to realize who I was very early on. While my classmates talked about the girls in school, I pretended to agree, but my gaze drifted elsewhere, to the boy in front of me, to the guy who played football, to the movie character who smiled differently. But the fear was bigger than everything. The first time I tried to confess, I was 12. I waited until my father finished preaching. I knelt down. And as I opened my mouth to speak, he cut me off with a smile and said, "Son, God has big plans for you. You're going to be a pastor one day. Don't let the enemy plant doubt." I never tried to tell him again. And so, I went silent. But silence became a tool. My father noticed I was different. Maybe he didn't know what exactly, or maybe he knew and chose not to say. Instead of punishing me, he began using me as a story of redemption. This one here has had sinful thoughts. He's flirted with dangerous paths, but God cleansed him. And me? I stood on the altar. While the church shouted, "Amen." While kids my age looked at me with pity or disgust. While my eyes burned, but my face smiled. My teenage years were filled with forced fasts, healing prayers, and deliverance sessions, not led by my father, but by brothers in faith he trusted. Once, a man from church locked me in a dark room and spent hours making me cast out the spirit of homosexuality. He made me repeat phrases, made me scream. I cried so much my voice gave out. When I got home, my father said, "If it hurt, it's because it's leaving. Stay strong. God is shaping you." And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Because it was easier to think I was sick than to face that maybe I had always been made this way. Then, at 17, something changed. I didn't change. But my resistance began to show. I met someone. It wasn't a relationship. It was a glance. A few words after a church service. A new boy in town who said calmly, "Have you ever noticed that church talks way more about what to hate than how to love?" That sentence stuck in me like a splinter, and inside, a scream began to rise. But I stayed silent. I pretended not to feel. Pretended not to see. Pretended I was healed. Until one day, I looked at myself in the mirror and said, "God, if you really love me, Why did you make me like this, and give me a father who hates me for it? Silence. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was afraid of what I might do with all that I was holding in. And that's when the spark lit. The night my father stood on the altar in front of a full church and said, "I'm proud of my son. He's living proof that God can fix any deviation." Something broke, and I made a promise. The next time you use my name, it'll be to hear the truth. And that's how my story begins. The altar of shame, my father's church, sat on the main corner of town. It was big, with a white facade and a cross that lit up at night like a beacon. Inside, faith ran deep. But love came with conditions. And on that Sunday morning, with a packed sanctuary and slow-turning ceiling fans, I became the living example of what they called redemption. Brothers and sisters, today is a special service. God has worked wonders in my home, and I want to share a victory He has granted me as a father. I already knew. The moment my father looked at me from the front row, that triumphant look, like he was about to present a trophy, I knew. Wanted to stand up. I wanted to leave, but my feet didn't respond. "Son, come up here. Let's show the church what God can do when we give Him our hearts." The mic crackled as he held it toward me. My hands were sweating. My face was burning. I stood up, as I always did. Not out of faith, not out of honor, but out of fear. The walk to the altar felt like an eternity. Each step echoed on the polished wooden floor. Every glance felt like a sentence. Some looked at me with admiration. Others with scrutiny. Most just waited for me to say what they expected. I turned to face the congregation. My father placed a hand on my shoulder. Gripped it. Hard. This young man went through dark times. He was tempted. He almost strayed, but God rescued him. He is living proof that homosexuality is a spiritual battle that can be won. The sanctuary erupted in "Glory to God," "Hallelujah," applause. People stood, they cried. And me? I looked down. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I stood still. Inside, something was dying slowly. That's when I learned what it meant to be used as an instrument of shame, disguised as a miracle. It wasn't about me. It never was. It was about the pastor's image, his authority, the God he claimed to represent. Up there, on that altar, I became a trophy, polished with pain. The church clapped, but no one looked me in the eyes. At home, the performance continued. After that service, my mother served dinner with a faint smile. She didn't mention anything. She only whispered, "Your father was very proud of you today." As if I'd won an award. As if that moment was a victory, not an act of exposure. I went to my room, closed the door, and stayed silent. For hours, and, for the first time, I thought, if I disappeared, would they miss me, or just the character they created? I started writing. On the inside cover of an old Bible hidden under the bed. There, I wrote my version of the story. I poured out my thoughts, had conversations with myself, imagined what I would say if I were allowed to speak, if my voice weren't a threat. I wrote things like, "I'm not a miracle. I'm someone trying not to disappear. God knows me, but you never tried." Everyone sees the pastor's son. No one sees the boy screaming for help. That's when the forced testimonies began. My father started taking me to other churches in the region. He introduced me as the healed son, made me speak a few words about deliverance. I recited rehearsed lines, said I had overcome desire, said I was a man of God now, and that I wanted to be a pastor, just like him. Lies, all of them. Every word ate me alive inside. Each trip added another layer of emotional scar. Then he'd hug me in public like I was his greatest pride. But at home, silence, control, distance, because he knew. Deep down, he knew it was all a farce, maintained to protect his own reputation. And the town bought it. People came up to me and said, "It's beautiful what God did in your life. You're strong, an example. Your father is a man of faith." And every compliment cut me deeper. Because the more they admired me, the more I felt buried alive inside a story that wasn't mine. My room became the only place I could exist. There, I took off the mask, wrote in my journal, listened to music in secret, songs about love, freedom, identity, and I started to imagine, what if, one day I said everything, from the pulpit, from the same place I was used, where they called me healed, where they said my existence was proof of a spiritual victory. What if I turned that altar into my stage of truth? That's when the idea was born. First faint, then steady, then inevitable. Next time he calls me up there, I'm going to speak. Everything. I didn't know how, or what would come after. But I knew I had to, or I'd die from pretending. And that's what kept me going in the days that followed. The hope of interrupting the lie with my truth. Even if only once. The day I decided to speak it was a Wednesday. Doctrine night was scheduled for 7 p.m., just like always. The church ladies had spent the afternoon baking cornbread and brewing fresh coffee. My father had been rehearsing his sermon since the day before. A familiar theme. Youth and the temptations of the modern world. But that Wednesday, something inside me shifted. I woke up with a burning in my chest. It wasn't a fever. It wasn't the flu. It was something else. It was like every word I'd never said had lodged itself in my throat, forming a knot that made it hard to breathe. And I knew. Either I speak, or I suffocate. I looked in the mirror and saw myself, truly, for the first time. Not how others saw me. Not as the pastor's miracle, or the delivered boy. I saw a survivor, someone who'd been through forced prayers, emotional exorcisms, family denial, and was still here, standing, breathing. And I cried, not out of sadness, but out of anger, out of rage. That morning, I opened my journal and wrote one sentence. Today, I'm setting myself free. And I closed it. Not because I was ready, but because I couldn't keep pretending anymore. The lie was like a shirt 2 sizes too small. It chafed, it bruised, and it no longer fit. I sent a message to the one person who knew the truth, Gabriel. He was that new kid at church, the one who once whispered, "The church talks way more about what to hate than how to love." He'd moved away months ago after being kicked out of his house. We hadn't spoken since. But that day, I simply wrote, "I'm speaking today. Wish me luck." And he replied, "Speak for us." The day crawled by. Everything felt sharper. The sound of the spoon clinking against a glass, the creak of the wooden kitchen chair, my father's voice on the phone, organizing the service. I watched everything in slow motion, as if the world was giving me time to back out. But I wasn't going to. Because this time, it wasn't about saving myself. It was about showing myself. I wore my best clothes, not out of vanity, but out of respect. Respect for that moment. Respect for the boy I used to be. The one who never had a chance to defend himself. In my pocket, I carried a folded piece of paper. A short speech. Direct. No poetry, just truth. Raw. Every word had been written over weeks, hidden in the margins of my journal. And now, they were ready to be spoken. At 6:45 p.m., we arrived at church. My mother wore the same floral dress as always. My father carried his leather Bible, bookmarked in the verses most feared by those who are different. We greeted the congregation. I got hugs, smiles. God's going to speak powerfully tonight. They said it without realizing who was really going to speak. I sat in my usual spot, front row, third seat from the right. The music started. My mother led the introduction. Then my father stepped up to the pulpit. With Bible in hand, he spoke about temptation, about lost youth, and, of course, about me. As I always say, the enemy tries to deceive even those closest to us, even within our own home. But God is faithful, and proof of that is my son, who's with us tonight. The church responded with a chorus of amens and applause, and that's when I stood up, head high, no looking around, no asking permission. I walked toward the altar. My father looked surprised, but not suspicious. He was used to my performance, but this time, I wasn't performing. I took the microphone. The room fell silent. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. I took a deep breath and said, "Today, I'm not repeating what they rehearsed for me." A murmur spread across the room. I continued, "Today, I'm speaking for myself, for the first time." And I pulled the paper from my pocket. I began to read. They taught me God loves truth, but when I tried to live mine, I was silenced. They taught me the church is a family, but when I needed love, I was paraded as a trophy. They told me I was healed, but I was never sick. My name is Eliot. I'm gay, and I don't need to be delivered from who I am. What came next was chaos. Some stood. Some cried. My father tried to pull the mic from my hands, but I held on tight. You used me as an example of sin. Now I'm the example of someone who survived your lie. And I stepped down from the altar, in silence. After the scream, comes the void. The echo of your own courage. I stepped down from that altar like someone jumping off a cliff, not knowing if there was ground below, or if I'd learned to fly on the way down. But in that moment, all I knew was that there was no going back. The sound of the church doors opening behind me still echoes in my head. People standing, murmurs rising, some in shock, others angry, a few completely silent. My mother. She didn't move. She stayed seated, still, eyes down, as if she wished she could disappear into the pew. My father followed me with his eyes until I walked out. But he didn't say a word. Not there. Not in front of the congregation. After all, the show had been interrupted. But he still had to look like he was in control. The night was heavy. The air felt thick. And all around me was silence. No cars honking. No kids playing. No sound to remind me the world was still spinning. When I got home, I went straight to my room. I closed the door. And I waited. Waited for the yelling. Waited for the scolding. Waited for the fight, but nothing came. Minutes turned into hours. Hours into early morning, and no one knocked. No one called for me. No one came in. It was as if I no longer lived there. On my phone, nothing. The church youth group went quiet. The family group chat too. I didn't get messages of support. Not even hate. I got nothing. The whole world had put me on airplane mode. I stayed in my room for days. No meals, no talking, no explaining, because honestly, I owed no one an explanation. I hadn't hurt anyone. I had only told the truth about who I am. But in that house, in that context, that was unforgivable. Around town, the story spread like wildfire. Did you hear what the pastor's son did? Shameful. He should ask for forgiveness. He's possessed. And worse, poor pastor. To have a son like that. My father became the victim, and I, the scandal. My mother wouldn't look me in the eyes anymore. We passed each other in the hallway like strangers. She'd place my plate on the table and walk out. Sometimes I heard her crying in the bathroom, but I never knew if it was for me or for her. And the worst part? The thing that hurt most wasn't rejection. It was absence. The absence of love. The absence of any attempt to reach out. I was excommunicated without ceremony, and I kept living there like a ghost. My father tried to erase everything as if it had never happened. At the next service, he didn't mention me. He simply said, "Temptation knocks at the door, but true soldiers of Christ do not bow." And I got the message. In that church, I no longer existed. The next week, I received an envelope in my room. No name, no note, just a bus ticket. Destination, another city. Date, 2 days later. It was the clearest message I'd ever received. Leave. Erase yourself. Forget you were born here. And that's what I did. I packed my few clothes, took my journal, the folded paper with my speech, and an old childhood photo, just to remind myself that I hadn't always been a mistake in their lives. I zipped the suitcase and left. No hugs, no goodbyes, no blessing. On the bus, head leaning against the window, I thought, that's it. It's over. But it wasn't. Because on that trip, I wasn't running away. This time, I was going toward myself. I arrived in a new city, knowing no one. No home. No plan. No promises. But for the first time, I had a story that was mine. And even though it began in pain, it was real. That's when Gabriel came back into my life. Remember him? The boy who told me to speak for us. He sent me a message. "I heard what you did. That was brave. Want to crash at my place for a few days?" I did. And there, on the simple couch of a borrowed room, I cried harder than I had in years, not from sadness, from relief. The days that followed were for rebuilding, learning how to live without pretending, without preaching what had once destroyed me, without hiding behind anyone's expectations. I started writing again. But now, it wasn't a diary. It was testimony. My truth, out loud. My story, in first person. And when I posted it online, something unexpected happened. Messages started coming in. From strangers, from church kids, even from pastors' kids in other states. You said what I never could. Thank you for showing me there's life outside that altar. Your pain. Where freedom begins, freedom doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with a sigh. With that first breath that fills your lungs after being held in for too long. With the sound of silence, the kind that no longer hurts. With the feeling of being able to sleep without fear that someone might knock on your door trying to fix you. My freedom began on Gabriel's couch, with a worn-out blanket, a thin pillow, and a lukewarm cup of tea in my hands. It wasn't home, but it was the closest I had ever been to one. Gabriel welcomed me with a kind of ease that left me speechless. He didn't ask, "What happened?" He didn't say, "How are you feeling?" Or, "What are you going to do now?" He just said, "Drink some water. Your towel's over there. Want to watch a movie?" And that was new. It was strange, but it was comforting. Because for the first time, someone treated me like I was simply human. No labels. No need to be strong. No pressure to smile to look healed. Over the next few days, he introduced me to others. People like us. People who left home because they no longer fit the family mold. People who lost their churches, their friends, their names, their last names. But they were still here, living, painting murals, laughing out loud, dancing with tears in their eyes. And I thought, so this is what exists on the other side of fear? We went to an LGBTQIA+ community center downtown. It was a small room with colorful pillows and the smell of reheated coffee. But what lived in that space was massive. It was truth. People telling their stories. People listening with open hearts. People crying together. People who weren't there to save anyone, only to see, recognize, and embrace them. I sat in the corner, silent. And a trans woman with blue hair and red boots looked at me and said, "You don't have to tell your story today. Just breathe. You made it, and that already means a lot." And I cried, because for the first time, arriving meant more than proving anything. I started writing again, but this time, not in secret. I wrote in the middle of the living room, while Gabriel cooked pasta, while someone played music in the background, and I wrote with a different ink, not the ink of pain, but of building, of discoveries, of what it felt like to exist without apologizing. I began to look in the mirror with new eyes, not as the pastor's rebellious son, not as the church's lost cause. I saw Eliot, just that, someone with a story, with layers, with a desire to love and be loved, without performance. One day, I met Diego, a friend of a friend. He was an illustrator and wore a shirt that read, "I'm not a miracle, I'm a survivor." And it felt like looking at a future version of myself. We talked for hours about music, about fear, about faith. Yes, faith. Because the strangest part is, after all I'd been through, I still believed in something greater. Just not in the God who told me to stay silent. In the God who held me the night I collapsed alone in my room. In the God I saw in the eyes of the woman with blue hair. In the God who spoke through Gabriel's, "Drink some water." Diego told me something I'll never forget. The kind of faith that silences you isn't faith. True faith expands you. That sentence became my new verse, written across my chest, not to show others, but to remind myself. In time, pain turned into scars. I still missed some things, but I no longer missed what hurt me. I missed what could have been. A mother who embraced me. A father who said, "It's okay." A church where I could enter without leaving parts of me outside. But deep down, I knew. Maybe that kind of longing was proof that I still had hope. And hope, even fragile, is still faith. I started telling my story online. Not for likes, but because I realized my voice could be a bridge. And then, the messages came flooding in. I'm a pastor's kid too. You gave me courage. Your words saved me. And I understood, truth doesn't just free one person at a time. I was invited to speak at a gathering for LGBTQIA+ youth. For the first time, I used a microphone not to echo my father's voice, but to speak in my own. And when I finished, and saw those tearful, smiling faces listening to me like I mattered, I realized I had found. When silence becomes forgiveness, life started to move forward. Not in a grand way, not like a movie scene in slow motion, but in a new way. Lighter. Possible. I could finally wake up without that heaviness in my chest. I walked the streets without checking over my shoulder, waiting to be recognized as the fallen one. I didn't flinch anymore at hymns or Bible verses. In fact, Sometimes I even found myself quietly humming the old ones. The difference? Now I chose what could reach me. My social media started to grow. Short clips of my story went viral. Messages came from everywhere. My mom saw your video and started calling me her daughter. My pastor shared your testimony in our church group chat and said you're a lost soul. But still, I cried. Thank you. You're helping me stop hating myself. And that fed me. It gave me a reason to keep speaking, keep writing, keep existing. Out loud. But even with all that, love. My family's absence was a hole nothing could fill. Until one day, a letter arrived. Not an email. Not a DM. A letter. Stamped. Handwritten. With my name in that familiar handwriting on the envelope. The sender. The house I grew up in. My hands trembled. The envelope felt heavy, like it carried every year of silence, pain, resentment, and longing that had gone unspoken. I stared at it for minutes, sat on the couch, took a deep breath, and opened it. The letter started simply. Son. That word hit me like a drumbeat to the chest. I kept reading. It took me a long time to write. Maybe too long. Maybe you don't even want to hear from me anymore. But I had to. Because the words we never say are the ones that make us sick inside. I saw your video. I saw you speak with strength, with truth. And for the first time, I heard what you'd always been trying to say. I don't understand everything. I still get confused. But I see now that the mistake was mine. My eyes filled with tears. That simple handwriting, the one I'd known since childhood, was finally saying everything I had waited years to hear. I kept reading, my voice shaking. I was afraid. Afraid of what people would think. Afraid of losing your father. Afraid of losing you. And in the end, I lost you anyway. Today, I just want you to know, I'm sorry, and I love you. With love, your mother. I cried. A lot. But it was a different kind of crying. Not the suffocating cry of someone who wants to disappear. It was the cry of someone whose soul had finally been seen. I called the same day. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was soft, tense, but she said it first. Hi, son. And that was enough. I didn't throw anything back at her. I didn't need to. The truth had already been spoken. In public, on the altar. And now it was being heard. In private, in her heart. We talked for hours, no pressure, no yelling. No one trying to change the other. She asked me simple things. Are you eating well? Who are you with now? Have you been feeling lonely? And in a quiet moment she whispered, I wish I had done better. I just didn't know how. From my father? Nothing. No words, no letter, no call. But my mom said he's different. That he watched the videos. That he stayed quiet for days after my speech at the altar. He doesn't talk about you, but he listens. In silence. Maybe. That's all he can manage right now. And me? I'm learning that some reconciliations don't come with hugs. They come with less resistance, and sometimes that's already a lot. A few weeks later, I received another envelope. This time, no name, just one verse, written in bold across the center of the page. The truth will set you free. John, back to the city that hid me. Coming back. That word had always sounded like a threat. Coming back meant facing the places where I had erased myself. Where I kept my head down. Where I swallowed every tear that wanted to turn into a scream. But that, December, something inside me said, it's time. It wasn't Christmas. I had no excuse. I wasn't visiting anyone who was sick. I hadn't been invited. I went because I wanted to see myself there. Again. This time, Completely. Not as the pastor's son. Not as the redeemed sinner. Not as the town's scandal. But as Eliot. And nothing more. The road looked the same. The same dry trees. The same faded signs. The same smell of countryside and dust. But something had changed. I was the one driving. For the first time, I was in control. I stopped 2 blocks before reaching the house I grew up in. I wanted to walk the rest of the way, like stepping slowly into a memory. Like telling the past, I'm here, but I'm not the same. The sidewalks remembered my steps. The neighbor's fence was still crooked. The dog on the corner, or one just like it, still barked. But I wasn't afraid of those details anymore. I was at peace. And that was the greatest revenge I could offer. My peace. The house was the same. White. With floral curtains, and a small Christmas tree already set up on the porch. I knocked. The doorbell rang, but I didn't wait. My mother opened it. She was wearing an old sweatshirt and had teary eyes. You came. That was all she said. And somehow, that was enough. She hugged me. No rush. No apologies. No attempt to explain the past. And in that hug, I felt that some part of her, even a small one, had changed. Maybe she didn't understand everything, but she understood what mattered most. I didn't need to hide anymore. We went inside, had coffee, spoke little. We talked about the weather, about a new grocery store in town, about the neighbor who moved away. No mention of the church, of the altar, of the scandal. And strangely, that too was progress. Because sometimes, what needs to be said already has been. The rest is just presence. In the afternoon, I went out on my own. I walked to the little park where I used to read in secret, to the store where I bought my first blue eyeshadow, and said it was for a school project. I walked past the church, doors shut, windows closed, but I could see it all. The altar, the front pew, the cross. And I smiled. Because I finally understood. That place no longer had power over me. I returned to the house with a light soul, had dinner with my mom. We laughed about old stories. She told me about a new prayer group she had joined, more open, more human. I'm learning slowly, but I'm trying, and I believed her. Because some changes happen in silence, like seeds that sprout when no one's watching. Before bed, I left a letter on the kitchen table. Not to accuse, not to reopen wounds, but to thank. I wrote, "Thank you for calling me your son. Thank you for letting me come back. Today, more than ever, I know I was made with purpose, not to fit inside an altar, but to live in truth, and to love, the way God made me." The next day, I left early. No tears. No scene. Just a heart full of something that had once seemed impossible. Reconciliation with my story. As the bus pulled out of town, I looked out the window and whispered to myself, I came back. But the one leaving now is me. And that's when I realized it wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about freedom, about naming the pain, about giving back what was never mine to carry. I knew altar. For a long time, the word altar made me nauseous. It symbolized everything that suffocated me, the pressure, the fear, the guilt disguised as spirituality. But over time, I realized, the problem wasn't the altar. It was what they did with it. Because an altar, any altar, is just a structure. What you choose to place upon it is what transforms it. And one day, I was asked to step onto one again. It was an unexpected invitation. A university was hosting an LGBTQIAPN+ welcome week. Someone had recommended me as a guest speaker. My first reaction was, no. I thought, me? Speaking? In public? On a stage again? But another part of me whispered, yes. But this time, on your terms, in your tone, with your truth. So I said yes. On the day of the event, I felt just like I did the night I confronted my father. At the altar, racing heart, shaking hands, a mind going 1,000 miles an hour. But this time the crowd didn't see me as a miracle, or as a threat. They just saw me. The auditorium was full. Young people, professors, parents, people with open eyes, ready phones, and even readier hearts. I took the mic gently, breathed, and began. My name is Eliot. I'm a pastor's son, and for many years all I ever heard was, "You are a mistake." Today I'm here to say, I exist, and I exist on purpose. I didn't tell my story like someone begging for pity. I told it like someone who survived, and was now offering others a path forward. I spoke about faith and fear, about love and control, about the scars we carry, from trying to squeeze ourselves into bodies, clothes, and ideas that were never meant for us. I talked about forgiveness, the kind you give yourself when the world doesn't know how to say sorry, and when I finished, there was silence. But not the kind that hurts, the kind that holds you, the kind that honors you, and then applause. After that day, more invitations came. Schools, cultural centers, progressive churches. Yes, even churches. I was invited to speak with young pastors, with pastors' kids, with mothers desperate to reconnect with the children they once cast out, and every time I step on a stage now I think, this is my new altar. Not a place to hide, a place to be seen. I started traveling. I met people with stories even heavier than mine. Boys who were sent to conversion therapy, trans girls who lived on the streets for years after being kicked out, people who survived suicide attempts, and others who came back to life because of a letter, a song, a single voice, and in all of them, I saw myself. I wrote my first book, titled The Altar That Silenced Me, The Voice That Saved Me, a blend of memoir, poetry, letters to my younger self, and to others still hiding. The launch was small, but every copy sold felt like a victory, and the messages kept coming. You're my proof that there's a way out. I watched your video with my mom. She cried and said, "Can you forgive me?" I was invited onto podcasts. I started my own channel, sharing LGBTQIAPN+ stories of survival. From ex-missionaries, ex-conservatives, ex-silenced children, and I discovered something that changed me forever. When you tell your story, truthfully, it becomes a bridge for those listening, and a bridge for yourself, back to a home you thought you'd never return to. And one day, I realized something powerful. That church altar was never mine, but I built my own, made of words, of listening, of presence, of truth, of empathy. And there, on that new altar, I made a promise. I will never again apologize for existing. I will never let faith be used as a weapon against me, and I will never allow silence to be my punishment. Today, I see young people who once hated themselves, dancing with glitter in their eyes. I see families reconnecting. I see communities that once preached against us, learning how to listen, and I know there's still so much to be done, but I also know we are building altars with our voices, and that is sacred. The day my father heard me. Some stories don't end with a period. They sit in ellipses, waiting for the day someone finds the courage to continue them. My father was one of those stories. The first gesture came in a letter, a single folded sheet with just a few words. The truth will set you free. John 8:32, and below it, almost like a scribble. I'm trying to understand. I stared at it like someone watching a comet. rare, unexpected, and capable of lighting up the sky. In silence, I thought about replying in 1,000 different ways. A long message, a handwritten letter, a heartfelt voice note. But what I really wanted wasn't another written exchange. I wanted to look him in the eyes and see if there was, finally, room to be heard. I did something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I called him. The phone rang 3 times, 4, 5, and on the 6th he picked up. The voice was the same, firm, low, like every word had to pass through a ruler. Hello? Hi, Dad. It's Eliot. Silence. Breathing. I know. We spoke for 5 minutes. About nothing. About everything. I said I wanted to see him. He replied, tomorrow, 4 p.m., at the house. Just us. Then hung up. No, take care. No, God bless. No questions. But I knew. That was the most he knew how to give. And in that moment, it was enough. The next day, I went back to the house I grew up in. Same wooden door. Same porch with the plants my mom used to care for. He opened it before I could even knock, wearing the same light blue shirt, his eyes deeper, his face paler. We stood looking at each other for a few seconds. Long ones. Then he turned and said, "Come in." We sat in the living room. No Bible on the table. No sermon playing on TV. No wall of verses. Just me, him, the sound of the clock, and the invisible weight of years between us. He spoke first. I saw that video, listened to it. A few times. Pause. Didn't like it. But I understood. It wasn't the apology I once dreamed of. But coming from him, it was a revolution. I took a deep breath. Looked at him like someone looking at their father, and a stranger, and I said, "You used me as a prop, silenced me, made me think God hated me." He didn't respond right away. Lowered his head, and after a few seconds he said, "I was afraid. Of you. Of what it said about me. About the faith I built, about what people would say." Hearing that, it hurt, but it was real. It wasn't an excuse. It was raw truth. And for the first time, he was removing the armor. We talked for almost 2 hours. There was no hug, no tears, no movie-style reconciliation. But there was listening, and for me, that was more than I expected. When it was time to leave, he walked me to the door. Stood there, hand on the knob, and then he said, "You're doing big things. I don't understand all of it. But I'm trying not to hate what I don't understand." And before I could say anything, he added, "Thank you for coming." I left with my heart quiet, not empty, not full, but at peace. Like the cycle was finally closing, not with noise, but with presence. Later, I sent a message. "Thank you for listening. That's more than I had for many years. What remains after the storm?" I used to think that the end of a storm meant a bright sunny day. Clear skies, birds singing, everything perfect. But the truth is, when the storm passes, there's no perfection. What's left is wet ground, debris, scars, and most of all, life. The first thing that grows after chaos isn't joy. It's the chance to begin again. And that's what I chose. I didn't rebuild my life to prove a point. I didn't take the hard road for drama or applause. I just wanted to live in peace, without having to apologize for existing. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see someone who's no longer trying to please ghosts. Someone who's learned to honor their own timing, to heal wounds no one else could see, to dance with their fears until they got tired of haunting me. I'm not perfect. I still have triggers. I still have hard days. But now, I know. Being strong doesn't mean never breaking. It means allowing yourself to fall apart and still choosing to keep going. I keep telling stories. Mine, others. Stories of people who never had the chance to speak. I started a project with LGBTQIA+ youth like me. Kids who came from religious homes. There, we don't preach, we listen, we hold space, we live. And with every new voice that rises, I'm reminded, truth sets us free, and freedom heals. I get messages from moms, dads, pastors, sons, and daughters. Some carry guilt, others, pride, many, fear. But they all want one thing, to reconnect. And every time someone says, "You gave me the courage to love my child again," or, "My mom hugged me after watching your video," I think to myself, every tear was worth it. Today, my faith is mine. It no longer lives in pulpits, doctrines, or threats. It lives in the small moments. In an unexpected hug. In a letter of reconciliation. In a mic handed to me with no script. In the silence that now brings comfort, not punishment. If God exists, He knows me. And if He knows me, He loves all of me. And that's the only theology I care about. My relationship with my father is still fragile. We talk from time to time. We exchange simple messages, but one day he said something I'll never forget. "I don't know how to be a father to someone I don't understand, but I'm trying to be man enough to learn." And that's when I understood. Sometimes, we plant seeds that bloom in silence. If you've made it this far, it's because some part of this story is also yours. Maybe you're Eliot, or maybe you're the father. Maybe you're the mother who didn't know how to love right. The brother who stayed silent to avoid losing his family. Maybe you're someone still in the room, on your knees, begging God to remove something He Himself put inside you. If that's you, breathe. You're not alone. You're not a mistake. You're not a detour. You're not a test of someone else's faith. You are life. You are voice. You are an altar, built of truth, resistance, and light. And every time someone tries to silence you, remember this.